Hello, we're joining you today so that we can learn more about the world of special education. And so Miss Ariel Morse with Calcasieu Parish School Board has agreed to join us today to share her passion for education and particularly special education. So why don't you just go ahead and take it over, Miss Morse? First of all, I'd like to learn a little bit about you, your background, and what drew you to this field, and then just jump in and share your expertise with us.
Sounds great. All right, so I'm going to get started by sharing a little PowerPoint that I've got for us. Are you still able to see me or no?
Yep, we can see you and we can see your PowerPoint.
Perfect. All right. So I am going to be presenting on students with exceptionalities. I included this little picture of my dog, Jake, and this is right after he had surgery. So he had his little cone and he got to take it off. And I wanted to put this one in there just to let you guys know that disabilities or exceptionalities are not limited to extreme cognitive delays. They can be a result of something that happens to you medically. So this was kind of just my way of like letting people know that you can be completely cognitively high average, but still have something that holds you back that makes you exceptional and qualify as a student with a disability. So moving right along, if it'll let me click. There we go. All right. So I am Ariel Morse Hudson. I am married to my husband, Jared. I graduated from LSU with my undergrad in kinesiology, and I have some minors in psychology and chemistry. Education was not the route that I was planning to go, but after lots of thought and prayers, I decided that that's where I wanted to end up moving into. So I went to McNeese after I graduated from LSU. And I got my Master's of Arts in Teaching, and that allowed me to become certified as a teacher in the elementary category. From there, I moved on and got my Master's in Education, also at McNeese, to become certified in special education, which is where I spent most of my time teaching. Once I decided that the classroom was a great environment, but I didn't know that the classroom was for me, I started to kind of broaden my horizons and ask lots of questions and network with the different people that were coming into our school. And one of those people was Dr. Anita Granger, who was an educational diagnostician. She was fantastic. She still is a great mentor for me. And she said, you know, you don't have to be a teacher to be an educator. And so that kind of got my wheels spinning. We had lots of conversation and I began my Master's of Education. During that, I decided to start my certification to become an educational diagnostician. After the hurricane and after everything like that, I ended up graduating with my Master's in Ed this past May, and I started this fall at Southeastern to work on my doctorate.
Congratulations.
Yay, I know, I'm very excited. And I am going to finish my educational diagnostician certification while I'm there. I'll finish that up in May. And that brings me to my current job now. I'm a 504 screening specialist for Calcasieu Parish School Board. I work in pupil appraisal. And so under us, we have all the educational diagnosticians, we have school psychologists, we have social workers, and we also have our 504 department here. There's also some audiologists and speech pathologists that work with us as well. So we all go into the different schools and service our schools, just not in the traditional sense of being a classroom teacher. So that's just a little bit about me. That's my dog, Jake. You'll see him a couple of times throughout.
He's so cute.
He's a mess, but he's awesome. All right, so to kind of jump right into this actual presentation, this is a great visual for people that might not understand the differences in what our population of students looks like. So in any school that you walk into, you have this overall bubble. I'm not sure if you can see my little mouse, but the overall bubble
we can see it.
Okay, good. So the overall bubble is all the students at that particular school or in that particular district. And then within that group is a subgroup of students who fall under what's called ADA or 504, which is what I do. These are your students that do have a disability, but the degree or the type of disability that they have does not qualify them to receive services under IDEA. So that's your smallest bubble of students. I think the percentage is about 2% to 3% for one individual school is about how many kids that would fall under IDEA. So it's the bubble sizing is probably not as accurate, but you get the idea that it kind of trickles down from the larger population. All right, so this is kind of the bread and butter of who is going to be involved in helping us identify our students. There's different levels to how that works, and it's not always linear. So these groups of people might not all be included, but sometimes you are using the whole toolbox of people. So for RTI, that's response to intervention, that's at the school level, your counselor, your teachers, your parents, your student, your administration, and your RTI personnel. That can include the individual RTI teachers. It'll just depend school to school. Once we move into the 504 and special education identification, there's a strict divide. So for 504, if we're looking to qualify a student under the Americans with Disabilities Act for 504 services, I'm going to be the only one that is in charge of that identification process. I might pull other people in, but that's not always the case. Where special education, you have to have a team of people that are helping to do that multidisciplinary evaluation. For pupil appraisal and Calcasieu, we use an educational diagnostician, a school social worker, and a school psychologist. They work in teams of 3, and they are in charge of every single IDEA evaluation. I do want to point out that we have an incredible shortage. It's very, very significant for school psychologists. I think we only have 2 right now working at pupil appraisal. Wow. And we have, I think, 6 or 7 teams that are in charge of all of our evaluations. So 2 people that are split between 7 teams, that's wow. That's kind of a big deal. So, people that are looking into education and trying to figure out where they might fit, if you have an interest in psychology, know that that's an area that we need people. Okay. So assistance and identification, these are just the people that we might pull in depending on what the student's disability looks like. We have an ATAT team that's awesome. They're your people that you would go to if you have a student that has any unique needs that would have to be helped through assistive technology. That can be just an iPad, but it can also be something that's a little bit more advanced or unique or individual to that student. 504 does not work with the assistive technology team unless there's a very, very unique case. Okay. Thing I wanted to point out for after identification, once we've decided this is what the student qualifies for, these are their accommodations, this is their services, this is what their exceptionality is, then we kind of hand it off from our perspective and we're giving it over to that special education teacher or the regular education teacher, and we're giving it back to the school to take over. One thing I wanted to point out too was that this is the biggest area where you're going to find people that are not educators in any capacity. We have lawyers on staff that handle our due process. We have program facilitators that come in and just make sure that things are running smoothly. We have then you have your school board of members. I actually looked that up before we came on. Only 4 out of the 15 school board members were actually educators. So you can be involved in education without being a teacher. So that's really important to know that there are so many roles that need to be filled, and how you choose to be in that role can look different from what my path looked like. So that's just all the different people though that come and help us get our students the services they need.
That's an excellent point.
Thank you. Thank you. So first off, it was that RTI. So remember, this is at the school level. This is how we're going to identify kids. I do want to say for me, RTI is not outlined as a requirement for 504. So there are unique situations where if it's a medical case, we're not going to go through a response to intervention because school interventions aren't going to solve the medical problem.
Okay.
Now, for special education, it is a requirement. There has to be some documentation that you've tried to overcome the deficits that the student has experienced. And that can be a behavior plan, or that could be through educational RTI, but there has to be evidence that something was put in place to try to solve it and it could not be solved.
Okay.
All students at every school go through RTI, even at the high school level. It looks very different than it did at the elementary level, probably, but you are receiving response to intervention. I think this year Barb is using fuel as y'all's time to go and do some type of instruction to help bridge some gaps in whatever area. If the gaps aren't being bridged, that's where you move into that tier 2 or tier 3. Tier 3 is a must for special education. I usually am okay if they've tried tier 2 or tier 3, if I'm looking at a kid with some academic deficits. I do also want to point out that RTI is a school-based thing. Who is in charge of it is at the school's discretion. How it's run, it is very individualized to each school. So for my job, I have to know that when I go to across the board like everyone else is, and that's okay. We just have to make sure it's being done. All right. Now we're falling into ADA. This is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is a civil rights law. That's kind of separating it from Act 504, which is an act, and then IDEA, which is also an act. This is a law that was put in place to help people not be discriminated against. It applies to all places in your little world that you might go to, even restaurants. They're required to put in handicapped bathrooms or handicapped ramps. Those are people that fall under that disability category. It can look like having a braille menu available if you're at a drive-through, and having something that someone who is blind can read, or having it read to you if you're hearing impaired in some capacity. So the ADA is federal. It goes outside of school, inside school, no age limits. I always point out that it does not guarantee you get a job, though. If you are a student that is disabled, you still have to put in the work and have the experience and qualifications to get that job. All right, so now we have 504 and IDEA. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is where my little wheelhouse is right now. It's a civil rights law. So that kind of separates us right off the bat, because if someone has an issue with their 504 plan, say you're not being accommodated and you have those accommodations, we do not do a due process like IDEA does. We have our own separate process that we have to go through because it falls under a civil rights law. Okay. There's no age restriction. That's a big one for us. We can go to college with you. If you have a 504 plan and you need to go to college, you can still be accommodated in that classroom setting with those accommodations. Whereas IDEA goes 3 to 21, and it's only within that K through 12 setting or pre-K through 12 setting. So once you turn 21, usually it's 18, it depends on the severity of the disability, and you are off to college or to some type of post-secondary degree, your IEP, your individual education program, has ended. So usually what happens is you will fall back to having a 504 plan under Section 504.
Okay.
Another really, really big difference is a 504 student does not get any federal money, whereas a special education student, the federal government says we are going to provide that school district with money for per individual child that has an IEP. It usually comes out to be about $7,000. I know that they've made some increases to that, so it can go up to about $13,000 for each individual student. And that's to service them, to provide that teacher, to provide the paraprofessional salary, to provide the accommodations that they need in that setting, to make sure that they are getting a free and appropriate public education. So that's a big, big difference between the two of us.
Okay.
All right. Now, we also are very similar, even though we do have lots of differences. We both have to fall under FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education. IDEA says that you have to be a free and appropriate public education is in a special education program. You are going to receive time with that special education teacher as part of your IEP. A 504 plan does not get that. We just have to make sure that it's comparable. So remember, we're not receiving any federal money for you if you qualify under 504. So we can't put you in that special education class because we're not contributing financially to it. So there is some overlap, but not enough to warrant that special education program.
Okay.
We have to provide parent notice if we are going to pick a student up. We've even had kids that have tried to self-advocate before they're 18. And if we cannot get a parent or a guardian to agree to it and allow us to move forward with it, we cannot do that. The parent has to be on board, or guardian has to be on board with it. We have to collect information from a variety of sources when evaluating. Part of that for this IDEA is we had those three people, the social worker, the psychologist, and the educational diagnostician. Each one of those is collecting their own data to help make a profile for that student to determine if they qualify. For me, I'm collecting it from teachers, from parents, from past academic records, and doing my own individual screening. So we're still pulling information, just doing it differently.
Okay.
And then we have to provide impartial hearings for parents who disagree. Again, our due process looks very different from IDEA's, but there is still rights that the parents have if they feel that their child is not receiving what they deserve to be receiving under their plans. All right. This is my wheelhouse again. So 504, I am going to screen and evaluate for a variety of disabilities. A lot of the times they're going to be medical. But there's also a really good portion that are strictly academic. So dyslexia, dysgraphia, math, reading, all of those are things that I can screen for on the academic front. Whereas oppositional defiant disorder, there are screening measures I can use to help figure out what the extent of it is, but as it is a medical condition, I cannot diagnose for that.
Okay.
So we do rely a lot on medical reports to help us determine eligibility. There were a few things that I wanted to point out in particular. A temporary accommodation plan. For me, that is for a student, let's say, that has broken their writing arm. And they have to be in a specific type of cast for a long period of time. They're not going to be able to write notes in class or take a test and maybe even write out their answers. So they will have what's called a temporary plan in place that just lasts the extent of their disability. So it could just be a 6-week thing if that's how long their cast is going to be on. Once that 6 weeks is up, they no longer are qualifying under 504. There's also lots of disabilities that kind of mirror with IDEA. So a math and a reading disability could fall under a specific learning disability.
Okay.
Autism is one of the categories for IDEA as well. It's going to come down to the severity of the disability and how it is impacting their academic life.
Okay.
So that has a math disability, but it's not 2 standard deviations below the mean, they're not going to qualify for a specific learning disability. But if it's under the 10th percentile, I'm happy to look at it and say that's impacting them, just not to a significant enough degree that would qualify for special education. So we work very closely together for some of those overlapping disorders or disabilities to figure out what's the best placement. Sometimes I'll screen a student. I realize this is way beyond what I can provide for them.
Okay.
So I start looping in my team or the team that would help evaluate for IDEA.
I notice you have other as well.
Yes.
I'm sure there are many cases that don't necessarily fall into something that you've dealt with or seen before. I'm sure part of your job is constantly looking at something new or a situation that's a little bit different.
A coworker and I just had that exact conversation this morning. 504 is so unique and so special in that no 2 disability looks the same, and there are so many gray areas. The biggest task for us is to figure out how is this impacting them, and is it to a significant enough degree that warrants us to put a plan in place. I think it's important to know that you can have some of these disabilities and still qualify for gifted programs.
Yes.
And receive an IEP. That is the only situation that you will have with both a 504 plan and an IEP simultaneously. So when we look at significant impairments, if you're a student that is gifted, but you have, let's say, diabetes, which is one of the we would qualify for, at any point in time, that medical condition can limit you in an academic setting in some capacity, and it can keep you from being able to get the appropriate education that you're entitled to, even as a gifted student. So 504 steps in and says, we're going to provide accommodations and legal safeguards to protect you because you have a disability, but you also have the right to receive that education just like your other peers do.
Yes.
That's the beauty of 504, that it's very gray. It can be tricky because there are students that have a disability, have one of these medical conditions, but it is not impacting them to a significant degree. And so figuring out when it's time to say no, the student does not qualify, because that's a hard part of our job.
Right.
Then when we have to step in, even though the student is doing okay. There's tons of other though, and those usually are the ones that make for an interesting work day for me.
I bet.
Lots of Google searches on my end. Yes, we get all kinds of fun stuff. I want to point out too that when we talk about medical, it's really important that we have to remember to keep a level of fidelity within yourself, that my process and this is what I'm required to do under my guidelines. So if we get that medical diagnosis that says dyslexic, 504 plan should be written from the doctor on prescription pad, that does not guarantee that you are going to qualify as a dyslexic student under 504. We have our own process of how we go about identifying that. So I know that can get kind of tricky, and trust me, it's just as tricky for me. But just because you have an identified medical condition, it doesn't automatically say you're disabled, you're significantly impaired in the classroom. That's part of what we do as a 504 screening specialist, is figuring out where to go next.
Okay. That's a very good point. Good distinction for people to understand.
Right, so let's go on to IDA. They are rigid. They do not budge. They have 13 clear categories. You can read them. They're long and lengthy in words. I think there's certain situations where you would look at it and you're like, okay, well, deafness and then hearing impairment, what's the difference? Well, there are clear guidelines for how you qualify as hearing impairment, for how you qualify as deafness. You're very rarely going to see multiple disabilities, but it's not uncommon, especially under specific learning disability, to see more than one area that's pointed out. So your exceptionality might be specific learning disability, written expression, but you might also have one underneath it for math calculations. That too into what they have no wiggle room when they say this is what it takes to qualify as a specific learning disability math calculations. There's a number that you have to be at to be able to qualify. Usually it's 2 standard deviations below the mean when it comes to the academic side. When it comes to the medical side of it, so your orthopedic impairments, traumatic brain injuries, things like that, they're too going to rely a lot on medical documentation, but they're also going to still use that educational diagnostician to go in and give an assessment to figure out what is their cognitive functioning and their academic functioning. So it doesn't matter which category we think you're going to go in, all 3 people are going to go give their individual assessments that they have to give. And you still have to meet their qualifications for that particular disability. So it's a little bit more rigid, not as flexible, not hardly any gray area. There's very, very rarely a time other than other health impairment. That's the one small little area of gray that they do get to work with. So every now and then you will have a student that is delayed significantly by ADHD, and it has caused them some severe academic deficits that are enough to qualify under other health impairment because of ADHD, but that's going to be very rare. That's about the only place that they have some wiggle room is under OHI. Any questions for me on that one?
And this is the one with the federal funding.
They get all the federal funding.
Got it. Okay.
You qualify under one of these, you are going to, you're not individually going to receive it, but
right. Your school system receives federal support to aid you in the class. Okay.
Correct. And where 504 does not get that. Okay, so this is just a little game that we'll be playing. I'll give you a sample and then I'll kind of pause for a minute. So for those that might watch it in the classroom, you can kind of quiz yourself at this point to see if you can get it correct. So I'll kind of pause to let you guys have a few seconds in between reading each case and then giving your guess. But Ms. Benoit, I'm happy to take your guess if you'd like to give one as well.
I'm terrible at this, you know.
Oh, I bet you're gonna get it. You've got this. All right.
And teachers, this would be a wonderful time to allow your students to work together in groups. I know you guys have probably already done, you might even have the little handout that you could use that has the 13 categories on it for reference. So this would be a great time to do that as well. And pause as needed. You can pause it as needed.
Absolutely. So teachers also, like she said, at the very end of this slideshow is 4 cards that you can print out and cut, or you can use dry erase boards if you'd like to hold up. It'll be RTI is one choice, ADA is one choice, IDEA is another, and then 504. So this case, we'll be reading it out loud. You'll think to yourself, and then you would make your guess of which category or which placement the diagnostician would go with, what direction they'd go. All right, so for our first one, it would be a student that has dwarfism, has difficulty using the bathroom at school because of the toilet. He makes good grades, but he did have an accident because of the restroom difficulties, and it caused him to have to leave school. So based on that information, if you are pretending to be the diagnostician that's called in, would you say that this falls under ADA, IDEA, 504, or RTI?
And we'll pause it and give you a moment to talk. Okay. I'm going to take a guess.
Okay,
I think it's ADA.
I think you are correct.
Yay!
Yay! So this does fall under a person. This person does have a disability, it being identified as dwarfism, but he's making good grades. This is strictly a structural thing within the school. They need to find some type of accommodation for this boy to be able to use the restroom without making an accident. Once like that, he should be good to go. There isn't any academic deficits that we need to try to address. It's not significantly impairing him in the classroom yet. Now, if it would have said it's causing him to leave school multiple times, that this continues to happen, well, A, why haven't we found a solution? But B, maybe it's starting to cause him some anxiety. Maybe he, got some things that are now stemming from that. But for now, just this first time, this falls under ADA. We're going to find something to accommodate him. All right, here's our case number 2. If a student has type 1 diabetes that was diagnosed by their doctor, she doesn't take medicine at school, but she does have to go check her blood sugar at lunch or before lunch. And sometimes she does have to stay and eat a snack with the nurse. At the beginning of the school year, she was missing a lot of school because her blood sugar kept spiking and she's having trouble catching up in class. So I'll give you a second to pause and figure out if you think this falls under ADA, IDEA, 504, or RTI.
Okay, I'm going to guess.
Okay.
504.
Yay! This falls under 504. She has also an identified disability, which is medical in this particular case, and now is causing her some significant impairments in the classroom. She's missing school. She can't catch up. She is having to leave class. We can provide her accommodations. Usually it's going to look like extended time to be able to catch up on assignments, replacement time in the situations where she just needs to leave class for a few minutes, come back, breaks if she's needed, and she'll not be penalized for those. It doesn't apply to the attendance part of it because that's a whole different side of things, but we can give her the time she needs to make up whatever she's missing because of that disability. All right. We have a student that has been diagnosed with ADHD. They're on medication for the past 2 years. They've tried to manage it, but the student continues to be extremely distracted. He made C's and D's last year, and he did not perform well on his end of the year test. His grades continue to decline, even though they've given interventions, and his behavior is also starting to decline, and he's getting written up regularly. So who would he fall under? ADA, 504, IDEA, or RTI?
This one's tricky. Okay, so I'm going to guess. I'm going to say that originally he probably was 504. But this seems pretty extreme. But we don't know that he was 504, right? We just know that. Okay.
We know that these are this is his little picture.
Okay, I get it. Okay, so now I think he is 504. If he didn't have a 504 in place, then this would be the picture that would possibly get a 504. Is that right?
In this case, he's actually.
It's too many. It's too many, isn't it? It's too many variables.
There's too many variables, and you're right. He obviously could have had a 504 in place, probably from the ADHD that we knew that was impacting him. It's the continuation of it. He's continuing to decline. He's in RTI. That's the interventions part of it. That's another giveaway. He's already in RTI. His end of year test, so his LEAP tests were not well. Most likely this is going to go to IDEA because it's having such a significant and widespread.
Okay.
So he's got the medical, he's got the academics, and he's got behavior going on. They're probably going to go that route first if 504 hasn't already been tried. They really don't like to try to put something like put a 504 plan in place and see if that works and then put IDA in place. They try not to do that.
Okay.
They keep the two departments pretty separate. So what would most likely happen is they would have an SBLC meeting. If the educational diagnostician felt that she was going to pick him up for evaluation, she would go through the full evaluation and say he comes back no exceptionality, he does not fit into one of her 13 categories, then she would hand it off to me and I would probably pick that student up. This one is one though, so it could have gone either way, but because of how widespread it is, it's most likely going to be referred to SPED.
And one of the key students that she mentioned earlier was interventions were already in place. And that's something to keep in mind. Okay, thanks. That's a good one.
You're welcome. All right, now we have a student that was diagnosed with dyslexia by an outside agency that's making average grades. She made basic on her LEAP test. Her math teacher noted that she was falling behind and doesn't ask for help. And her parents have now contacted the school or the teacher with concerns. So where would she need to be placed based on the information we have? We have IDEA, 504, ADA, and RTI.
Okay, we're going to pause just a moment and you might need to refer to your little chart, but I'll take a guess for us. I'm thinking 504.
That's a good guess. This is actually going to be RTI.
Oh yeah, because we didn't do any interventions yet.
We have not done any interventions yet, but the biggest thing is we don't have any evidence that it's significantly in the classroom. An outside agency, just like let's pretend it would be a doctor or an outside psychology clinic. Let's say they did see that she has dyslexia. If the parent brings that outside evaluation to us, we are required by law to review it. We are not required to abide by it as if it's the Bible, right?
Right.
So we're going to look at it. What we would do is hold an SBLC, and what I would tell the school is put her in RTI, start tracking her. Is there,
right?
If we see no evidence that she's making progress, then we need to come back to the table and review again. But if that RTI is just enough to help her bridge that gap, then we're good to go. She stays out in that bigger bubble of students and we continue to monitor her. I put her on my mega watch list of all my kids that get referred to me that I did not pick up, and I check in on them every so often. So for now, she needs to be in RTI until there's more data to show that it's significantly.
When I made my guess, I actually forgot about RTI. I was thinking just ADA, IDEA, 504. So that's a good takeaway for me and probably the students as well, is that school level RTI can be exactly what a student needs sometimes, which is sometimes it's kind of frustrating to figure out how we're going to do it from, an educator standpoint, but it can be exactly what a student needs to make the difference. So that's something important for us to remember.
I like to point that out to you because it really is so important. So if you believe in RTI, which our district does, our district is that RTI, if it's used with fidelity, can be enough to make the student bridge their gaps. And especially in a sense of hurricanes, right? Well, that's a big thing we're dealing with right now, is that students had a lack of educational opportunity. It's called LEO. If that is the case, because they were not able to come to school for whatever reason, then IDEA cannot pick that student up, period. There is that part of one of their rigid rules. We also really can't either. I can't say that you're disabled if you haven't been at school to show me that you're disabled. So we are relying so heavily on RTI to figure out for the next probably year, in the next couple years to come, we're going to be relying really heavily on RTI to see, did that student's 3 months of missed school from COVID and then 3 months of missed school from not being here from a hurricane, did that cause a gap that was so large that it has created a disability that RTI cannot bridge, or was the disability already there and we just now are able to see it and prove it? I think the biggest thing too is to remember that we're not wanting to watch the student fail. I've had a teacher, accuse us of that in the past where they're saying, we'll say we need 4 data points that show that they are continuing to either stay flat or go down. They're not making progress. We need to know that everything you're trying isn't working, so y'all got to step in. And so her response, so you just want me to sit back and watch them fail for the next 4 weeks? No, that is never the case. We just need to know if that whatever you've tried, it can't work. So that's further proof that we are needed. We have to be in there to bridge the gap that you have not been able to do. RTI is so important. I can't stress that enough. And it's going to be a huge component in the next months, years to come for our particular parish. So I like that you pointed that out. It really is a critical component of what we do and what you guys do at any tier.
Yes.
All right. So we are moving on. You are going to quiz yourself once I leave you. There are some additional case studies and you can work in a group or by yourself to hold up the sign of which one you think that case study falls in. But I'm going to let you guys do that on your own and let your teacher decide what the prize is for getting the most correct. So I hope that you guys have taken something away, but also are able to apply it in a way that you feel more confident about identifying those different disabilities and what direction we would take those disabilities in, because it's a really big portion of every single school. Every school's got students that are struggling.
Yes.
And even you who are going to be potential or future educators need to be able to be a part of that process, because you will be in some capacity.
Yes.
A way to get around it.
Yes. Ms. Morse, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your passion with us, and also your path. I think that that's just as important, that students understand, like you said earlier, that there are many different roles to play in education, and the entrance point.
Infinite.
I think we all agree that the classroom is is probably the best. It's not the only, but it's probably the best entrance point. But from there are so many different ways that you can support your system and make such a meaningful contribution in the lives of so many students. And this is so instrumental for us. So we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes, I've got one more slide for you. It's just got some resources.
Excellent. And, and we get one more picture.
One more picture of Jake. This Bulletin 1508, that is Pupil Appraisal's handbook. That is our Bible here at Pupil Appraisal on how we identify. So if you are going to be writing a report on this part of the job, this is going to be something that you're definitely going to want to look at. There's also something about 504. That's the second one. And then Louisiana Students with Disabilities. That shows you how we in Louisiana help to service our students. So those are just for you guys if you need them. If not, that's my contact information. I'm happy to help or answer any questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And if we have questions, we will reach out to Miss Morse Hudson. I noticed that. I love it.
All right. Well, it's so nice to meet you.